Today at Crazed Performance Repair, we are going to do a four-wheel brake job again. This is going to be another PowerStop kit. This is one without the slotted or drilled rotors. It's basically any other brake job. With that, we will get rolling on this four-wheel brake job. Don't forget to check out the description below. I always throw a little extra info in there, or usually throw some extra info in there. And there is always links to different items that I might be using during this brake job. There will be several that will be listed in there for sure for this one, because there are some very handy tools and products that I will be using to do this brake job. With that, we are going to get started and rip this corner apart first. And then we will go to the back after we get the other side, and we'll go over the whole process. I'll even show a little unboxing quick. Alright, so I got the wrench here. I'm going to start tearing it apart, and we are going to zip through the tear down in probably less than 10 seconds. Ready? Let's go. There you have it, all four ripped apart in 10 seconds. And yeah, let's go ahead and go over some things that are important when doing your brakes. And we'll start with the front. Alright, so I've been using PowerStop now for quite some time. I actually like their products. I have had a couple situations though where they rusted faster than expected. I usually use their drilled and slotted. Now I noticed there are two different versions. There's like a heavy duty version, and then there's the standard version of the drilled and slotted. And I think it's the standard version on like the trucks and stuff are the ones that are rotting. The heavy duty version is the one that's actually suitable, I believe, but I am unsure yet. So this one I wanted to try something different. I wanted to stick with them and see if I still like their products in the respect of a different version here. So this is the coated set of rotors rather than the drilled and slotted. Drilled and slotted is really not necessary. It's like a vent for gas, but nobody's really braking hard enough to need to vent the gas, so you're better off without the drilled and slotted normally. But we're going to take a look at the pads quick, see what I think of these. These are a ceramic pad. They don't look much different than any other pad really. They're I mean, they're a brake pad, and there they are. So there's that. They have a little bit different color in the metallic part, or those little, it's like little brass pieces in there. But other than that, I don't really notice anything different. So we'll set those aside. Now the main part that I'm concerned about, or want to look at, are the rotors themselves. Wow, that's some fancy packaging. Give them that. They normally don't do that on their other stuff, at least not that I'm aware of. You know what? This looks like a hell of a nice rotor. That coating is beautiful on there. This is obviously the rear, but this thing that is a masterpiece of a rotor. I'm very, very impressed. So we'll see how they perform in the long run, but so far it's looking like it's going to be a pretty nice piece. So I'm going to go ahead, lay this out where all the rest of the parts are, and then we'll get to the assembly and going over all the different things I need to go over. Alright, the first thing we are going to go over here is the hubs. So this is a special hub cleaner. It's meant specifically to go over top of the studs. So this thing is a very, very handy tool. We are going to go ahead and clean this hub up with a couple of different tools. We have this and then a regular 3M Roloc whiz wheel. So let's go ahead and get at it. So what you see me doing here is this is a super scraper, and I'm utilizing it to clean off the areas that I can't reach. So there's a narrow spot here, but an extremely narrow flat spot here. And the extremely narrow one I'm using to get right around the edges. And then the wider spot I'm using to touch up wherever that whiz wheel can't really get, because it'll knock off any of the high spots on the rust. Your goal here is to make sure you have no high spots, because if you have any high spots, it's going to end up warping the rotor. Now once all the hubs are clean, you want to use something like this spray anti-seize. I'll link it in the description. This stuff is amazing for keeping things from getting corroded and stuck. I use it all the time. Alright, once you have all the hubs clean, the next step is to take care of the piston here. You want to make sure the piston is in all the way so that you're able to move forward with putting the brakes together. Now, this side here, the front on these is just a standard caliper, and what I did, in fact, this one I had to open the bleeder because I forgot to check the reservoir, honestly. I just forgot to check and I started puking out. Normally I check, I pull the cap, that's the wise thing to do. I totally forgot to do that on this one. Just probably because I was in the middle of all the suspension work, I just forgot. But anyway, so you want to collapse this. Now, if it is really full, you pretty much have to do this or you're going to make a giant mess like I did. But if it's not full, you can usually collapse these no problem. Go slow though, because you can damage the ABS module if you get way too aggressive with it. Now, brake fluid stings the eyes really bad, so be sure to throw safety glasses on. Another thing you want to notice is, like this one in particular, it's got a torn boot here, which I do not like at all. That's going to be a failure later on down the road. It's actually tearing around the whole way, so I'm going to have to make note of that on the repair order and inform them of this. That way, down the road, they can either just choose to replace it or leave it. But the thing is, this will probably be okay until the next time they have to do brakes. What will happen is this piston will keep coming out. It'll slowly get moisture in here, start rotting, and if you try and push the piston back in, it'll end up leaking after you do so. This one does not appear to be rotted yet. I can see inside there and it looks like it's in pretty good shape. So I'm just going to go ahead and reuse this caliper at this point. But in order to compress this, we're going to loosen this bleeder as I'm squeezing it. A couple ways to do it: either a giant channel lock, bigger than this one preferably, or a C-clamp, large C-clamp. So I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure, not much, and then I'm going to crack this bleeder free. And then right as the fluid stops flowing out, you want to shut that bleeder. Now it still came out of the cap, so apparently I went a little bit too fast. It's leaking all over my hose. I'm going to have to clean that up. Great. But anyway, so once you get that thing collapsed, then you have to look at this guy here. You can see it's down correctly here, but where that little damage spot was, it's kind of funky. You can take and push that in. A lot of times, if it's in good shape, it'll balloon up. And that's just because the air is trying to escape, but it's actually sealed properly, and it can't escape. This one is just a case of, I don't know, that it's damaged maybe that's causing the issue. I'm not sure why it's like that, but we're going to just carefully sit here and work this thing until we push it back in there. Because that's most likely what damaged it in the first place. Was somebody doing brakes on this, it doing that, and then when they put the pad in, it got pinched between the pad. And that'll cause damage to these. It'll make the brakes feel a little off. So yeah, that's the front. Now we have to do the rear. The rear is a little tricky and requires a special tool. Okay, so here's the tool that I have. They're also available elsewhere. I will go ahead and throw a link in. But this is a special caliper collapsing tool specifically for rear calipers like this one, where it has to be rotated to collapse. So we need this guy for sure. Now you'll notice this piston here has these notches in it. Some have 4, some have 2, depending on the car you have. This particular vehicle has 2. We have to collapse this thing. It's got the parking brake integrated, and that's a screw mechanism inside here that screws it in. So you have to turn this in reverse in order to do it. Now before you even put the tool on, it's always a good idea to take this seal and kind of make sure that it's nice and loose. You want to kind of just work it around, because if it sticks, it'll turn that rubber seal, twist it off, and damage it. So now that's loose, we have to find the appropriate adapter that fits in there. This is a little loose, but it's the smallest one I have on this kit. And we're going to set the pieces in there so that they line up. We're going to take this guy, we're going to back it off until it comes against this here. We're going to give it just a little bit of a turn. So now it's got pressure pushing down on that piston. I pulled the cap off, which by the way, always put these back on. They keep this thing from corroding. Believe it or not, this will probably come loose, even though it's in an aluminum caliper, steel fitting. Because it has this cap, most likely I won't have a problem with this. Okay, so we got our 10 mil here to take this bleeder loose. We're gonna go ahead and try it just with a wrench, because I believe since it had that on there, it should come loose. Ooh. Oh, maybe not. We're gonna have to give it a little bit of a love tap, since it's not attached. Or we're gonna use an impact, because that's just not working. So it's actually corroded. Somebody probably added that little cap later. And this, since I would rather not break this off, I'm just gonna go ahead and create a mess and let it overflow out of the reservoir all over the place, and I'll just have to wash it up with water when I'm done. Alright, so how this tool works is you rotate this guy clockwise on most vehicles. There's two different tool versions. There's the style like this where it can only go clockwise, and there's another style that can go both directions. Now some vehicles, it's reversed depending on the vehicle you're on. They spin backwards on one side and the correct direction on the other side. I don't know how to tell the difference, but I know you know as soon as you try, because if you turn this clockwise, it should loosen this up. Okay, I just turned it a little bit, and look how it's loose. So what I do is I keep one hand on here, turning this counterclockwise, while I turn this guy clockwise. Okay, so now I have it in the correct collapsed position, but the notches are laying a little bit kitty-wampus. Now the pads almost always have dimples in them that line up with those notches. So this one, you can see there's a dimple right here. That's the back half pad. But this one has a dimple here and here and here. This dimple is going to end up lining up with one of those notches. So I have to be sure those notches are straight with that dimple. I'm going to go ahead and turn this back a little bit just to make sure it's in the center. And then we pull this guy out. So now this is ready to be put on as soon as I get all the rest of the parts in place. And we will go ahead and go over the brackets and how to properly set those up. Okay, so the first thing you want to do here is clean out these grooves. If it's severely rusted, you can use like a die grinder and a cutoff wheel if you're really cautious, but unless you've done it before or are really good with making sure you get a smooth, clean area, don't do that. If you do it so lightly that you barely have sparks or see metallic. If you see metallic, don't keep going, because you're just going to cut a nasty groove and make the brake pads sloppy, and then they'll start rattling. The best way to do it is take your time and use a file. What we're going to do, clamp this guy down nice and good. And then we're going to take this file, and we're going to use the corner first. We're going to scratch at the thicker rust. It'll push it out of the way. And then you see I'm using the edge of the file to kind of clean up inside the rest of the area. And I'm trying to keep it as even as possible across it. Your goal here is to remove the rust without removing the metal. Alright, so I have that nice and cleaned up. Now you're going to have to put the clip on, but you don't want to put the clip on until you lube this up. Now most people make the mistake of throwing this clip on here and then they lube this side of the clip. Well, usually what locks a brake pad up is this side rusting and pushing the clip against the pads, pinching them. So you want to get yourself a decent caliper lube. This stuff is actually pretty good if you want to actually go buy some. The PowerStop kits do come with lube. Most brake kits come with lube. I'm a cheap bastard, so when it comes to buying stuff, so I try and save where I can. And every time I get these kits, I happen to end up with more of this stuff because I just put it in here. Why not? So now that I have that all up in there and nice and gooey like, we're gonna spread it up. Oh, whoa. We're gonna go ahead and apply some to the surface. Then we're gonna place the clip on here, repeat the same procedure on the other side, and then we have to address these pins. So the pins on here, some of them you can take off on the base here. Sometimes they send boots, sometimes they don't. PowerStop usually does not send boots, so I do not have boots to put on here, but looking at this, I'm not gonna need boots. It's just dirty. There's no rust, there's no moisture. It looks pretty good. So I am just gonna clean this up. If you want, feel free to clean inside there too. The only time I do that is if I see rust or moisture. Otherwise, I usually just clean this pin, add new lube to it, and then put it back in. But I don't use this stuff on that part for lube. You probably could. I don't think it would hurt a thing. I actually prefer using dielectric grease, the clear paste, although this is kind of opaque, but it's well used and dirty. Kind of dirty, I mean dust. But I put this stuff on here. I'm gonna need to refill it looks like. And I make sure I put a decent amount on without putting too much on. Now if you put too much on, you'll know it because you won't be able to squish the thing in there. So you have that pretty good. Now if you put enough on, sometimes it'll fill this bellow a little bit and create an air pocket, and what you want to do when that happens is just pinch this up like that so you got a little air gap, and then push it in and it'll ooze out of there. And that's actually a good thing if it does that. That means you got more than ample enough in there, and it'll do a very good job. Now you can see it's actually holding itself in now, whereas before it was sitting out. So I'll pull it back out once. Okay, now watch what happens here. See how it pushes itself back out? If I do this and then pinch it and then let go of it and let go of this, now it's actually pulling itself back in. And that's kind of nice because it'll hold it in the position you want for when you go to assemble this. So this process is repeated for all four corners, and as soon as I get that done, we'll go over the installation. Okay, we are back to the front brakes now. We are gonna go ahead and get this thing assembled. I wanted to note something quick. You can see a little rub marks here. That would have been making some noise on the vehicle when driving. That was where the rotor had rusted and swelled up and contacted this caliper. So just keep that in mind. If you hear a noise or something, you might want to look there before you go saying, hey, the pads are shot. But let's go to the next step here. We're gonna get the rotor on. So set that guy up there. Now, this is a stud installer, and I'm gonna use this to hold the rotor into place. Some rotors have screws. Usually the Japanese cars, they'll have a screw or something that holds it down, but they don't have that on these cars. So I'm just gonna use this. This will make life so much easier to be able to put everything together. Now the bolts that hold the caliper bracket, you wanna make sure you put Loctite on them. This will keep them from rusting, as well as make sure that they don't ever come loose while they're not intended to come loose. Now that we have that on, we're gonna go ahead and throw these pads on there. The squeaker is typically on the inside, but always double check, take a look at the pads. Sometimes they'll say inside or outside on them. Also, you wanna make sure you check for different kinds of markings on either side of it. But this one, the scraper is gonna go on the inside. Now we're gonna go ahead and set this caliper in place, and you're gonna probably have to push these in order to do so. Now there's a flat spot on these pins, and they line up with a section of the caliper there. So make sure you pay attention to that. Now these screws, I have mixed feelings about whether you need Loctite or not. I am not gonna Loctite these ones. I'm just gonna go ahead and put them in. Just make sure you get them torqued tight enough without being too tight. Now we can pull this stud puller thing off, and this corner is completed. Now when you do the rears, there's only a couple small things you need to be concerned about. The only thing you really need to worry about, which I mentioned before, but we're gonna cover it again anyway, is this little mark here. You want to make sure that when you put that on, it actually lines up properly. Now, I don't know how well you can see that, but it's going to line up with that, and it sits in there ever so perfectly. So it is on the bottom side, so when you slide this on, it will slide on, and then it has to line up. If you have trouble getting it to line up, it's probably because you have this turned incorrectly. So with that said, I am not going to put you through the torture of watching me slap this thing together. We are going to call this video done. I'm going to get this car back together, finished up, on the road, and then do the break-in period. Now, the break-in period is pretty important. A lot of brake pad companies will send a break-in period thing with the brake pads. For you, I would advise going by that. For me personally, I have my own procedure that I follow that I feel works better than what a lot of manufacturers offer. Some of them, when it's a specialty pad or something, I will make sure I listen to the manufacturer, but usually I have my own little break-in procedure secret that I do, and I'm not going to go into that with you. So with that, if you guys felt this video was worth your time and energy listening to, and you feel it saved you enough money, or any other video that I have perhaps, be sure to check out my website. If you have no other reason but to support me, you can go ahead and pick up a shirt just like this one here. And the only difference is you won't say owner on it, right by the boob there. But otherwise, pick up a shirt. It helps support me. Keeps me rolling, keeps me moving, keeps me putting these videos forward. And with that, like, share, subscribe. And as always, I hope to see you on another video. Thanks for watching.